going to tell you an old story passed down to us from the East. The story goes that there was a traveler who was visiting a town where an old friend of his lived. Now, this dear friend was a very wealthy merchant, and the two of them had a grand old time telling stories, drinking wine, and eating a delicious meal. Well, it came to pass that the traveling friend fell asleep, and while he was asleep, our wealthy merchant decided to give him a gift. He took a priceless jewel and sewed it into the lining of our traveling friend's clothing. Now, our traveling friend woke up the next morning much earlier than his host, and he set off on his journey before his friend could tell him that he'd sewn this extraordinary jewel into the traveler's cloak. And our friend didn't have, the traveling friend didn't have much money. And so as he went on, he actually went through that money and became poorer and poorer to the point where he couldn't even provide for his own food and shelter and more clothing. And so he became more and more destitute as time went on. And all the while, he's carrying this priceless jewel that could have brought him riches beyond imagining. I begin with that story because over the next few minutes, I'm going to introduce a method for how to feel great all of the time. This method is based on the insight that a life of happiness and health is within the grasp of all of us. In other words, we all have that priceless jewel hidden within us, and provided the right mindset and effort is put in, we all can uncover that jewel. But what is that mindset? Well, before I answer that, I should say that I am on this journey with you. I am assuming that, like me, you are also looking for a formula that will allow happiness and health to define our lives. As I have gone looking for this formula or method, my first question is whether life is even meant to be happy and healthy. In fact, until recently, I would have answered this question in the negative. With my own personal experience and my understanding of history as my guide, I would have felt very safe in saying that life in general is afflicted with stress, sickness, strife, and maybe, but for a few moments here and there of happiness, is utterly unfair and exhausting. Yet, when we go and look at the actual statements of great masters like the ones they call Jesus and Buddha, we hear them say that there actually is a universal formula for happiness. And they're all consistent in what they're telling us. Interestingly, the latest research by the most esteemed neuroscientists of our day is confirming that the techniques that they recommended actually do make us happier. And yet so few of us actually follow the formula that these wise masters gave us. What that formula is will be the topic we return to again and again in these different episodes. But one of the most important elements of the method, and the one that I want to begin this series with, is this understanding that heaven or nirvana or enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, isn't some far-off place that good people go when they die. Contrary to popular belief, those places that those masters were talking about are right here and available to any of us right now. Each of us has a priceless jewel hidden within us, just waiting to be discovered. We may not notice it, all the great ones have told us, but the truth is that life is actually great and the universe perfect. Now, I have to admit that it's hard for me to say that with a straight face. It just seems so foreign to so much of my, as I said, personal experience and just look at conflicts around the world and history and so on. And yet, this insight has been repeatedly arrived at by some of the most insightful and extraordinary individuals to have ever lived. So why doesn't it seem that way to us? Why does history, and even today, and even for most of us, for most of our lives, does it look so different? Did these amazing humans, biographers and disciples, misunderstand them maybe, or misquote them on such an important point? Or were they lying to us? Were they misinformed? Or maybe they were just genetic freaks of nature and just genetically were able to be super happy all the time. Or maybe they were just making it up. Most of us, looking at our personal experience, will say they must be wrong. And there's plenty of esteemed professors and famous authors and scientists of our day who are going to be on hand to confirm that life really has no meaning or purpose, and that the ability to wonder is wonderful enough. Try telling that to someone in Aleppo, Syria in the last few years. But nevertheless, these intellectual giants encourage us to dismiss the insights from these ancient wisdom teachers and rely instead on human reason alone. They don't seem to realize that they would have us worship science and the human mind instead, which sounds a lot like a god by another name to me, though a much weaker one. So which is it? Who's right? The modern atheist or these ancient masters? What I think will become clear as these next few episodes unfold is that just because it doesn't feel like life is great, and just because nowadays all these smart and famous people confirm this feeling, that doesn't mean that these ancient wisdom teachers and many wise masters alive today are wrong. The world may look unfair and filled with needless suffering and stresses, but it isn't. It may seem to be a place where bad things happen to good people and cheaters and liars can get away with it, but that isn't what is actually happening. You're probably listening to this thinking, yeah, right. That's certainly what I would have been thinking not too long ago. If that is your reaction, I would ask that you give the method a chance before dismissing it. The thing I love about this method is that we don't have to take anyone's word for it or believe in some super being called God. Instead, we are encouraged to investigate for ourselves the apparent inconsistency between these claims of perfection on the one hand and what we see happening in the world on the other. It doesn't ask that we permanently accept any part of it on faith without testing the value of these sorts of beliefs or faith ourselves. But we do have to start somewhere. How do we do this? First, we try out the various recommendations of these ancient masters and pay close enough attention to our own lives so that we can test the validity of these recommendations for ourselves. And second, we keep an eye on the best available science on these methods and always remain open to adapting our practice based on what we learn about neuropsychology. In fact, the crux of the method is to do the training exercises that are recommended, or any other tried and true ones that we would like to try, and then pay close attention to our own well-being and life's direction. A good rule of thumb is that if the technique has lasted for thousands of years, or emerged independently in different places at different times in history, it probably works. So we get to choose from techniques like meditation, martial arts, yoga, prayer, chanting, and so forth. The point is that we have to be able to verify whether there is any improvement for ourselves, in ourselves. This method requires us to be scientists, to take our practice to the marketplace of our own life. When we start meditating for just a few minutes every day or doing the neuroplasticity exercises to release unwanted feelings, we have to pay attention to how we feel afterwards versus before and notice whether our life overall begins to change. We need to find a way to keep track so we can validate it or not for ourselves. Now, the teachings you will hear from me as part of these episodes aren't unique. As your fellow student, I certainly didn't make them up, but I have noticed that the same lessons are repeated again and again by the wisest humans to have lived. So there's no need to just listen to the way I'm putting it. There are many other systems, apps, and teachers that are very effective. Having said that, I have found that the method that I am sharing in these talks has several unique elements that distinguish it from the other options out there today and make it worth the time to keep listening and try out the practices. The first element that makes this method different is that it is a complete, coherent, and highly effective system that delivers more happiness faster, at least than anything else I have encountered, or it is as much happiness as fast as anything else you will encounter. I would also say that though it isn't necessary to understand this aspect of the teaching, it explains most of the big questions about life. So it doesn't just explain to us how to be happy, healthy, and fulfilled, which is pretty good, but also questions like why we are here, what the purpose of life is, who we really are, what the meaning of life is, why bad things happen to good people, what happens when we die, and other questions like that. So when you use a meditation app like 10% Happier, that kind of captures for me the challenge with the common self-help books or mindfulness-based therapies or meditation apps or even standard issue religion. Yes, these will very likely improve your life, and very quickly you will probably feel somewhat, for example, 10% better. But to get the other 90% better, either won't work with these systems or requires a huge amount of work and a lot of time. Taking the best elements from the greatest masters in contrast, this system is a simple, practicable method to reach the full 100%, or at least a lot more than 10%, and at a much faster speed. The second thing that distinguishes this method is that it is non-religious, non-philosophical, and non-metaphysical. You don't have to have a degree in philosophy or become an expert in some obscure branch of metaphysics for it to work. You don't have to be devoutly religious or speak in tongues or join a cult or even believe in God or prophets or far-fetched tales of miracles and myths. Having said that, I will say that if you are a religious person, I actually think this method will complement and enhance that connection. The third aspect of this method that I like is that it's free. Many other systems have excellent underpinnings but require financial support of some kind. They make you sign up for expensive coursework, seminars, or conferences, require that you pay to see a psychotherapist on a regular basis, or in the case of some of the best apps like Headspace, Simple Habit, and 10% Happier, which are really excellent in many respects, we find that they are profit-focused corporations, and so they require you to pay a steep monthly fee for full use of the techniques. For example, nearly $17 a month in one case. And worse than the expensive fees, they use the same mind-corrupting techniques developed by social media companies and persuasion labs at universities like Stanford to addict you to their app or website and consume more and more of your time and attention. We're not going to do that. And finally, this method is different because it feels good to do it. We don't have to join a monastery or live a life of asceticism or self-mortification or quit our job and families to go live in a cave somewhere. Many religions, or at least some of their most important saints, prophets, and thought leaders suggest, or even outright say, that the, quote, mortal flesh or earthly as opposed to heavenly existence is somehow evil or impure or deserving of punishment or self-inflicted pain. In contrast, this method is available for everyone to use in their everyday life. It celebrates our earthly existence, albeit in a demoted place, and is all about feeling great. All right, before moving on, since we're going down this path together, and this may be the first thing you're listening to, I thought you might want to know a little bit about who I am. By profession, I am an entrepreneur and a venture capital investor. Over the course of my career, I have founded or backed dozens of young companies in the technology, clean energy, media, and financial services sectors. On a personal level, I have been married for almost 20 years and have 2 teenage sons. My religious background is pretty thin. Though my parents are both Catholic, I wasn't baptized, and other than a couple of times at Easter or Christmas and maybe a few weddings, I didn't spend much time in churches growing up. Nevertheless, I have always been fascinated with spirituality and the nature of our minds and the cosmos. I have had certain spiritual convictions for a long time, but was continually disappointed with the various traditions I studied over the years, and developed quite a strong cynicism about most religions, self-help gurus, and mystical traditions generally. And so, as the years went by, given my busy work and family life and lack of an inherited tradition to fall back on, I found that I didn't have much of a spiritual life to speak of. What I did have aplenty were the emotional and physical woes that are too common among those of us who are apparently making a success of our lives. As a result of those woes, I embarked on a journey to see if there was a method that just about everyone could use to feel great. I began practicing different forms of martial arts, yoga, meditation, prayer, and so on, and I embarked on a multi-decade project of reading widely in contemporary and historical, spiritual, philosophical, psychological, and neurological texts. Fortunately, I stumbled upon an extraordinary teacher named George Falcon, who has since passed away, unfortunately. And much that you will hear from me comes from the work I did studying with him and the insights he inspired in me as I read and practiced the techniques developed by many an ancient master and talked with him about those techniques. So you're now on the journey with me. Hopefully we'll enjoy traveling on this path together. I might be a little further along than some of you and behind others, but I'm still very much a student of all this. So hopefully that will mean that you can relate to my views on the subject. Since I have a bit of a head start, I can give you a little preview by saying that I think you will be amazed by what you will learn in the next few episodes. It is startlingly good, so stay with me.